Hello everyone, my name is Kayla Adams and I will be presenting my community in words and pictures on Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City is located in Utah, for those that don't know. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So Salt Lake City is actually pretty white in terms of demographics. So 73% of the population is white, while Hispanics actually make up about 13% of the population. So you can see here that there's not a ton of diversity. There is some, and it is the most diverse city within Utah. So if you do want diversity, this is where you have to go within Utah to obtain it. Gender and age distribution. So the median age is about 31 to 32 years old, and that's really fairly young. And most of that is because Salt Lake City is a very young city in terms of people come here for school because of universities, and then the young professionals. A lot of the older population tend to settle outside of Salt Lake because they don't want to live in a city setting. So you will see younger median age in Salt Lake City because of that. On top of that, Salt Lake does have a ratio of sex. There are less females to male ratio within the city, but that is very different from the rest of the state because most of the state actually has more females. And that's because a lot of the males leave home to serve an LDS mission outside of Utah. So you'll see more females outside of Salt Lake. But within Salt Lake, this has changed a little bit because the LDS population is a bit smaller. So when it comes to quality of life and the measures, that we want to look at, there's a lot of education opportunities, and a lot of the population within Salt Lake is pretty educated. So a lot have, completed high school, gotten some college, or have finished a degree. So there you can see that pie between the green, red, pink, and brown are all people who at least graduated high school, right? And then, at least had some college and then have at least graduated. So almost 50% of the people in Salt Lake have a college degree, which is pretty good. And then looking at the poverty rate, it's a pretty small rate. There isn't a ton of poverty, though it is growing because Salt Lake is growing, and so is the homeless population. So you are seeing a small increase in poverty rate that is happening, but overall the poverty rate is not super high. But they do want to start figuring out what to do when that gets higher. The religion within Salt Lake, people are pretty religious within Salt Lake. About 75 are religious, and 50% of that population is LDS. So outside of Salt Lake, about 65% of the people are LDS, so it does go up, but half of the population in Salt Lake is LDS. So when it comes to another quality of life measure, violent crime rate for Salt Lake, it's pretty low. It's definitely below the national average, which is really nice. There aren't a lot of violent crimes. I'm never really afraid when I'm there. So it's really nice. Though it is interesting to see that when it comes to property crimes, we are above the national rate. So something to consider when looking at this community. Why is property crimes up so high, and what's adding to that? The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints plays a major role in Salt Lake. 50% of the people who live here are members of this church, and they invest in businesses. So City Creek is a huge mall that they've actually built close to this temple, and huge stores. It's very beautiful, but a very big business. They also own Desert Industries, which is a nonprofit organization that has a chain of retail thrift stores. And so they provide not only low-cost clothing for people, but also job training, skills training, and just employment in general. So that's a good thing that they provide. A lot of people do have an issue with how much the church has influence in the city governmental matters and state governmental matters. So there's some contention around that. Intermountain healthcare is actually a huge deal within Utah itself, and of course Salt Lake. So they are the biggest private employer in the state. I actually work for Intermountain Healthcare. My sister works for Intermountain Healthcare. It's either you work for them or you know somebody who works for them. So it's a big deal in terms of like the employees and people who are really dependent on this company. It was actually a gift from the church in 1974. So you can see again how the LDS Church has had a big hold in this community. So, and then we have the University of Utah, which is kind of the flagship university for the entire state. The university is located at the base of the mountain in the city. It's beautiful, and everybody within the city kind of has a lot of Utah pride, especially around our football and gymnastics programs. I actually went to University of Utah for my undergrad, so I definitely understand the role that this institution plays in the city. The other kind of sports team that they have within the Salt Lake is the Utah Jazz. And this is actually the only professional sports team within Salt Lake. So people really love this team and they really support them. And it's kind of another unifying factor. A lot of the pillars of the community come from this team. So John Stockton and Karl Malone were kind of superstars back in their playing days. And they now have streets named after them. And they have car dealerships and kind of they're a very big deal. And then you have Jerry Sloan, who was the coach, and he is also a pillar of the community. So this is a map of Salt Lake City. It's actually cut into 7 distinct districts, and each district has a representative. So it's a city council, and then you have a mayor, how that's made up. So you can see how this is cut up in terms of this is what the city looks like. And it's neighborhoods, and everyone kind of knows which neighborhoods are what, and which areas are nicer than others. So one of the issues that Salt Lake is dealing with is the inversion. And this is kind of a mix between the fact that when the winter air gets trapped, that it kind of keeps pollutants building and from getting out of the bowl that is Salt Lake. So with the mountains surrounding the valley, it's really rough for Salt Lake in terms of this. So you can see this layer of haze that kind of sits over Salt Lake during the winter months. It's really bad in the winter when that, cold air really traps it in. So something to consider as well. So let's consider if this is a good community. I may be a little biased because I do love Salt Lake City, but this is a good exercise to figure out, like, I may love it, but is it operating well? And so there's a lot of homogeneity in terms of neighborhoods. Again, this is not a hugely diversity, though more diverse than anywhere else in Utah. So there are pockets where there are just white people, and there are pockets where there are just black, and you can kind of move between them pretty easily. When it comes to safety, Salt Lake has a very low crime rate. And when it comes to environmental issues, Salt Lake doesn't have any natural disasters or anything like that. There is heavy snowfall, so that can cause some risky conditions. But other than the inversion, which is, a hazard, especially for young people and old people and people with breathing problems, it's a pretty safe city. When it comes to goods and services, there's a lot of places to shop, a lot of places to get what you need, whether it's big businesses or small businesses. There's a lot of options here. So there are some issues around housing. People are just moving into Salt Lake so much that they're having trouble keeping up with the housing situation. So definitely something to look into as the city grows. So the relationship that binds citizens together, the LDS Church does play a big part in how the community fits together because they find community to be so important. They really do play a big part in making sure that, everything's kind of working as a community and people really care and are very kind in Salt Lake. When it comes to values, though, because Salt Lake is home to 50% of LDS population, there's some contention with people who don't belong to the church around some values and goals. For example, the church does not condone drinking. And so anybody who's not part of the church and does drink has to deal with the laws around drinking that the church actually has some influence on. So there's some contention around the goals there. The whole person principle, as this population of homeless increases in the city, we're seeing more negative views of homelessness and the cause of it. So a lot of, just people who write people off instead of seeing the whole person. So that is something that is going to lead to more conflict within the city, and we need to start sussing out right now. Predictability. Salt Lake does have an ebb and flow that kind of keeps things running in a consistent way. So everyone does know what to expect. It's growing, but they're doing a fairly good job of not disrupting kind of that flow of the city too much or too drastically, so that predictability is gone. So I think that's a good thing they're doing. And many of the residents call Salt Lake City Small Lake City because you do end up knowing someone or knowing someone who knows someone. And that kind of keeps you in a social structure. But this is starting to disappear as it grows. And you're kind of seeing that disconnect that can happen when you don't have that social structure. So I hope they find a way of kind of keeping it inclusive while we grow. There are a lot of opportunities within Salt Lake in terms of being able to access cultural experiences. The theater is huge here. Dancing is huge. There are some great libraries. There are some great museums. And the educational opportunities there. There's a couple of other universities within Salt Lake as well. So Utah also has a very low unemployment rate. So it's really an employees market right now. So there's a lot of opportunities for careers and jobs. So overall, Salt Lake is, I think, a good community. I mean, it's going through a lot of transition. And there are a lot of things that we have to start considering, in terms of homelessness and the inversion, and transportation and all of that. But for the most part, this, I think, is a fairly good community that operates really well. And we see that in the economics of it and how it's growing and people are moving in. But I do want to see some efforts in how do we decrease pollution so we can help with that inversion, and how do we prepare for the homeless population as it increases. So definitely some work to be done so that we're prepared for the future and not going to be blindsided by what happens. So thanks for, listening to my presentation. This really is a beautiful city. If you're interested in anything outdoorsy, hiking, biking, anything outdoors, the mountains are beautiful. The culture is amazing. People are just very kind here. So definitely visit if you can. Thanks so much.